Okay, just a couple of things I wanted to discuss before we break for today. I've just shared a couple of screenshots with all of you as well. So you were asking me in terms of how attack looks in real life. So I'll show you how we are basically doing it at our end. So there are multiple fronts that we're using. So all our attacks that are happening or all the log entries basically which are coming up get channeled in one of these faces, etc. So this is basically the attack explorer that you're seeing with the details of tactics deployed, right? If you look at specifics, I'll just share them again. Yeah, if you look at specifics, so for example, in command and control, what you're seeing at the moment is any outbound connections that are made, right? So these get mapped to command and control as well. And using the APIs at the backend, they basically go ahead and map to Attack Explorer. So if similarly we look at just similarly, if we look at multiple fronts where like this is the command and control one, right? This is again outbound, unexpected outbound ports that we're seeing, right? So this basically comes under exfiltration. If you look at this, this is basically process exploitation that we're seeing, where suspicious activity is being happening from raw network traffic. And another screenshot I'm sharing with you is around processes being hijacked. So this is exploitation processes. So all of these basically, this is how you look at it in terms of real-time statistics, where you basically take logs, map it to Attack Explorer using the APIs that we just basically spoke about by mapping certain amount of words, etc. that we get. Now, these are tactics that basically get mapped out, and then over on an overview you can basically see what is happening in your network on a day-to-day scale. You can see it in like last 1 day, last 30 days, last 7 days, whatever you want to. You can see it per tactic, you can see it per technique, whatever you want, right? So this is how this basically helps out, and in each layer you can also go ahead and see mitigation perspectives when you click on them. So if you ask me, this is how basically it maps out to real world statistics in real life. Any questions?
This you have built in-house?
Sorry?
In-house you have built?
Yeah, most of it is built in-house. Only the attack part is completely built in-house.
Okay. This is nice actually.
So this is
How is
basically
the how is the log ingestion happening? Are you cleansing some of the data before it goes there, or it just like it comes all the as it is?
raw logs are basically going to SIEM, and SIEM we've plugged in, like I showed you my architecture. We basically got a plugin into the SIEM where it basically looks at the logs, maps it to the attack APIs, and then the attack APIs basically return the intent data, and then basically using the TTP tactic, we basically map it on the attack explorer, which is just like a UI kind of thing.
Okay, so this plugin is written in-house, or it is like
No, it's written in-house.
okay.
Yeah. Backend is all attack API, which I have shared with you.
Okay. But the feeds are also coming to the SIM, right? In your framework.
So feeds are coming to a sedentary box which is running on Docker on Kubernetes. So everything basically comes there, and that basically maps it.
Okay, so you are actually having a separate machine, the other architecture which you showed,
Yes.
where you need to extend outside of SIM. Okay.
Yeah. So the only problem is that we have a SaaS-based SIM. So when you're ingesting logs and you're rebouncing logs, then you have to pay for additional. So basically, you're duplicating logs, right? Unless you replace them. So that
Mm.
way your storage increases. So hence we keep it in-house.
Yeah.
Any questions on this?
And the attack framework, what you just showed, right? The UI where it is automatically going to all those pillars,
Yeah,
where that is running, it is also running
it's
in.
on a it's on a separate. I mean, on the same box that you have is just a UI. It's just a UI built in React, which
Okay,
basically just picks up the data and publishes it.
got it. Yeah, could
Well,
you just explain the last piece example now that I got this data visualized into the attack framework?
yeah,
How is that intelligence it is going to feed to the SOAR for some of the actions?
sure. Just give me a second. So basically, what happens is now that we have say XYZ, which is already come up right now. So you have your attack explorer, etc., which is masked out here, right? Now what happens is, for example, there is a CNC which is coming up here, right? Now in this, what we do is we take the TTP ID, right? And we hit the attack explorer here, or the, sorry, the MITRE attack framework.
Mhm.
And for that TTP ID, we look for a corresponding mitigation ID,
Okay.
right? If mitigation ID, for example, is xxxxx.1, whatever, right? It says to basically deny port sweep, right? We basically take this and plant it into our SOAR. Now, for example, there a real world alert comes up which basically says that there is communication happening on say IP 100.1.1 on port say 9002, for example, right? Now this, for example, has never happened, and this goes and maps to the attack framework, gives me a TTP ID, right? TTP ID goes ahead and maps to mitigation ID. Mitigation says deny. This basically goes to SOAR. SOAR goes back to my Kubernetes control plane and injects the rule here. Kubernetes control plane tells this pod that outbound communication, sorry, outbound communication say on 1.1.1.1 on 9002 is denied. So this can't make that communication out.
Okay.
Now, similarly, if I receive an alert that process say chrome.exe is hijacked or hash has changed from when the pod was spawned, right? This again will go to attack. Attack will again look for mitigation. Mitigation again will look, tell SOAR. SOAR will again tell control plane. Control plane will again tell pod, and pod will basically kill that process. Now, another scenario, for example, there was xxx.dll file which is spawned, and I did not get any TTP ID in this case, right? For example, it's a new process. I'm not getting anything from attack. What
Mhm.
will happen is this will basically go and search all my external feeds that I have on that same box for any information. For example, this gives me still a score out of say 0 out of 40 feeds that I'm using, right? In this scenario, this basically goes, tells SOAR that, and tells Kubernetes control plane and tells pod to run isolated. So this will basically isolate this entire pod into a different namespace.
So this will not have any communication. Okay.
Now, what will happen is this, because my pod has not been able to take any action here, right? What will happen is this will flag an alert to on call that I had pod so and so with information so and so was running. I did not find anything in attack. I did not find anything in threat. I did not find anything in my own feeds as well. So please see what you want to do. What I have done is I have isolated this pod right now. So at least further threats are denied. So lateral movement, etc. cannot happen. But now what the engineer will go do, he will see, okay, what is happening, whatever is happening. In case the pod is malicious, they will take an action. In case it's non-malicious, they will just unquarantine it. And the pod itself will start communicating again properly.
I think this would be the. I think these cases will emerge as your one of this attack vector actually increases, especially in microservices environment.
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
it is the same problem with the node level isolation also.
Absolutely. So the same thing happens on the node as well. So if a node is running and it sees differentials,
Yeah.
and that has multiple namespace pods running on it, it basically, we tell the control plane to shift all pods onto a different control on a different pod, which is a base pod, and then we basically quarantine that isolation pod. We don't kill the instances running on that. So for example, for service one, there were 10 pods running. Out of that, say 2 pods were on this machine, right? What it will do is it will tell this thing that reduce or increase pods to 12. Okay, the two new pods which will come up on machine, say 3. Okay, and these two will go into quarantine. So my total pods still remain 10, but anything that is happening on this base pod will get quarantined.
So the access to the resources like database or SNS or any other resources, those things will be also isolated for those two pods, or
Yes, so basically everything goes via the control plane itself. So it depends on what type of networking you're using. If you're using Istio, etc., or something like that, then you can either do it via that. If you're using the Kubernetes control plane itself, you can do it via that. There's something called as network policies on Kubernetes, and what they basically do is allow communication either to CIDR, or it says allow communication to namespace name.
so that will be pod to pod communication. But the
Yeah.
other resources like databases and all will also be isolated.
So databases will be running on something like an RDS endpoint, right? So what we do is outbound com to say RDS endpoint, say on whatever 3306 or say whatever 5002, whatever it is, will also get broken. But only after a new port has been spawned.
Okay. And this is good actually. And then once it is isolated, then you run some kind of a
See, because
investigation on.
whenever anything is happening, the first thing that people generally do in incident response is kill the pod, right? If you kill the pod, you lose out all your forensics.
Yeah,
And
that is correct.
the idea is services should not get impacted. So what you do is you tell your autoscaler that, hey, instead of 10, launch 12, but launch it on a different pod machine, right? And instead of that, then if this base node is impacted, then we tell all services. For example, we take a list of services. Okay, 10 services are running. 3 pods, 2 pods, 1 pod, 5 pods are on this machine. So we increase the autoscalers to that much, get the pod spawned, and then we just add the namespace policy on this, that this communication is now completely barred. So my services are not impacted, the pod is isolated. Security on call can take their time to also basically go ahead and review this and see what is happening, what is not happening, and then basically take an action.
And the review is basically these pods will be running, and the review of this will be only through logs of those pods, generating the logs, trying to
So
whatever.
yeah, so basically we have a timeline policy. What we've done is we've got a admin defender basically installed on the Kubernetes control plane, which injects a Kubernetes namespace pod in every, sorry, it injects a Kubernetes pod into every namespace. What that does is it monitors all network communications processes, files being created. So FIM, PIM, PAM, everything is getting monitored via that. So I have a complete history in terms of a timeline that when your pod got launched, what communications it made, what DNS communications it made, what internal communications it made, what processes spawned with what hash values. Was there a difference in this hash value compared to say 10 days ago, 20 days ago, 30 days ago? So I have all that data available with me,
And this is running as a sidecar.
running as a sidecar. Absolutely.
This is very good actually. Very nicely done.
That you are actually preserving because your the pod or the node that is isolated, again, it is not going to be running for a while. So eventually you're going to rely on these logs.
So we are going to be relying on these logs. See, the only problem which starts coming up is, so for example, my pod got infected, right? Now, whenever we are spawning the main pods or we're auto scaling, it will anyways take it from my code base, which is my basically my internal registry. It will come and it will spawn a fresh source of that,
Right.
right? So whatever infection has happened here, anyways doesn't get translated into the new service, right? Whatever is getting spawned. Now, what if this pod itself dies off for some reason and I don't receive my logs on my sidecar at all? Then in that scenario, there is also the control plane receives certain amount of logs for sure, to enough to basically to be able to tell what had happened.
Yeah, where I'm actually going is like one is that is happening at the runtime versus not happening at the runtime.
Mhm,
What has actually been committed, you got it logged into the log collection,
yeah.
whether it is FIM or anything.
Mhm.
What could have happened in the runtime? Let's say now that you have isolated, now the dependencies are not reachable. There is a chances that the containers would die in that particular node, whichever you have isolated, right? So I was just like
So
trying to see
yeah,
if there is anything that I'm going to still miss.
yeah, containers will die. So but they will not exit. Our default policy is not exit, they go in a pending state.
Okay, got it.
So if you exit the node, then they die. If you put them in a pending state, then you can basically still log into the container and check the logs and all.
Got it.
So, this kind of pods, is there like, I mean, I'm not sure. What are the incidents of pod getting infected? I mean, we have, because this is very lightweight stuff. See, the
Yeah, and
point is what Kubernetes area, I mean, maybe, see, if somebody attacks the API, I think that's the bigger security risk, right? But the pod getting infected, is there a chance like that, or what are the incidences you've already faced?
at the end of the day, the pod is still running Nginx version something, Apache version something or the other, right? So infection chances are still there no matter you're still running on a pod space, right? Uh, Now, in terms of say APIs, etc., so this is like more of a runtime kind of protection. API protection also happens. So anything that is getting monitored or filtered, so the unusual communication alerts which I showed you are happening on the communication level. So pod is not infected, but is trying to communicate to something different. Maybe somebody just spawned a new service altogether, which is not whitelisted. So it can happen on that as well. So that just gives you a double layer control in terms of somebody releasing a new API which hasn't gone through security, right? If that happens, it doesn't allow that communication through.
Two more questions, bro.
Yeah.
One is okay. Let me finish this question related to this topic itself. One is you just explained exactly what would actually happen from stage to stage, attack to TTP-ID, and then you have a mitigation, all those things.
Yeah.
What if happens on a anomaly side? Example, that the threat coming from a known IP and my system doesn't detect. I would have had somewhere the security analytics going, and I would have had my ML stuff to train this particular traffic insertion. Let's say I pick it up. Now, where is that security analytics pipeline would come and sit into this for those anomalies?
Your attack case is that this is a known IP, right?
Yeah, this is a known IP, and all my systems are pretty fine with this IP because the reputation is not being impacted.
Sure. So, see, this is just what I'm talking about in terms of threat intelligence. But if you want to see if a known IP sector is coming in, right, there are a few ways of looking at it. So, number one, security has always worked with IP trust, right? Where we say that I want to trust whoever is coming in and whoever whatever they're doing. I look at it slightly differently. I say I'm going to trust it basis of action. So I don't actually care what the IP address is, right? As
Mhm.
long as you are coming and, for example, there was a login API, right? You come, you log into my API, you get a normal authentication token, you're done, you go through. Fine. Now, whether you're addressing this from a whitelisted IP or you're accessing this from a VPN IP or accessing this from a Tor IP, I don't care. Right. Now, if you come and if you're doing multiple login failures, if you're coming and you're trying to change any parameter etc on the fly etc, I block sessions. I don't look at IP addresses, right? That particular session I will hold. Secondly, if I see multiple such sessions getting initiated from a specific IP address, then I go ahead and block IP.
Okay.
So I don't really care whether it's whitelisted. So what people generally do is they whitelist vendors out, right? What if it's a supply chain attack and your vendors itself are compromised?
Yeah, that often's very much in the B2B side.
Yeah, so that's why because we are also heavy on B2B as well, and with a lot of whitelisting is required as well. So I don't do whitelisting on a base that IP address is coming and I whitelisted. I whitelist behavior.
Yeah.
They're
Okay.
following that behavior well and good. If they're not, or if they're deviating as well, it basically quarantines them straight away.
Yeah. The another question that I had is like, uh, I don't know whether this makes sense. Let's say if you were into a situation to build this framework, and today you have a SIEM technology from XYZ vendor or someone using open source, could be anything. When they're gonna switch to SOAR, attach a SOAR to the existing platform, what would be the selection criteria? Because here there are two things that is getting merged. One is the thread feed and the intelligence to filter the data, and there is an automation that is triggering. So you still have to stitch back to a common framework. So what is this common framework is working all together here?
It depends on you completely. So tomorrow, see, SIM vendor can be anything, SOAR vendor can be anything. The central, so my
Where
crux
I'm
and
actually going is there an industry framework to say, hey, these guys adhere to this APIs or this API standards or this frameworks, whatever it is?
so that you will have to train your data.
Okay.
So basically, my machine learning or my brain completely comes on that one box which I'm saying was hitting. So one is a like a third party box where I'm saying, okay, is looking at mitigation ID, attack ID, blah 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 blah, all that whitelisting stuff and stuff is happening from there, which is basically collecting CTI. But my brain is basically happening on the logs that I'm collecting from the Kubernetes plane on my sidecar. So if that basically doesn't trigger anything in the first place, right, it will not even go ahead and look at attack IDs.
Hmm. Okay.
So if you're saying in terms of framework, no, there is no consistent framework here, but there are ways. I mean, it just depends on how you want to see it. I'm just following a zero trust model here, something very similar to a zero trust model here.
Yeah.
If you want to call it something as a framework.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, at least today, for every other major technology, there is some sort of standards that is being put across. And since security is always evolving on every day, so I'm just thinking, is there at least there is one body which is actually dictating those frameworks? I was just curious on that.
Yeah, nothing like that. I think for everybody, use cases are very, very different, right? And the problem with vendors is that they're solving one problem for many people, and everybody has different problems altogether. So even what if I say that this, if I take this entire system and give it to you, will it work for you? Maybe, maybe not,
Yeah,
right? So if I'm not saying this is the right way to do it, all I'm saying is just think from this perspective as well. That's all.
makes sense.
Cool. Any other questions anybody has? Right. I hope I've tied up some loose ends today in terms of describing whatever we've been doing and discussing in terms of CTI information and how it'll actually look. There are we will be speaking about a couple of more things as well in terms of more topics on how we collect data, also how we hunt, right? So there are a couple of things where I will take you through an exercise of say DNS hunting, how we can actually look at those logs, how do we map it to attack, etc. What do we look in those logs? So I will take you through that as well. Uh, there are a couple of topics in terms of collection as well, which is left, which we will be covering next time, and that should be able to basically close this perspective. Uh, Majorly, what you really need to be sound with and what you will be using a lot is are your frameworks. So the four frameworks that we talk about, those should be very, very clear in your head. Especially attack, you will be seeing everywhere because it's becoming industry standard. But even the other frameworks, they basically start to really add value for everything, and that is the crux that we need to basically focus on. So if something or the other is not clear in either of those four frameworks that we have, uh, then I would say please discuss it with me. Otherwise, that is the main crux that you really need to look at and use, and attack being the standard. That's why I'm focusing much more on that rather than anything else, because you will see it everywhere.
Sure.
Right, folks. So next class morning, I will be discussing the quiz with everybody once. I just want to go through your responses once and see where you've gone wrong, what is not clear. And post that, we will just start a few couple of more topics, and then uh, I will just show you a couple of tools as well, and along with Miss basically tying everything up.
No, this use case example is really good, bro. I think this is where it's all stitching back.
Perfect. So there's another stitch which I need to still do with MISP right now, which I will do. I purposely didn't cover it today because there's one loose end which is still left, which once you get into the uh, problem solving of galaxies, etc., and objects with MISP, you'll understand the entire concept of how CTI is basically getting fed.
Sure.
Right, folks. So have a good weekend. Overall, from the scores, well done. And we'll discuss what went wrong, what went good, etc. next class, and we should take pick up from there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you.
Folks,
Thanks.
just make sure we complete our assignment before next Saturday. That is something which is due. It will also help you in your final exam as well. So let's just see, let's just hope that we can complete it and I get some time to mark it as well, preferably as soon as possible that you do.
Yes, sir. It's already quoted as 9th July, before 9th July.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, folks. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.